Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Grasslands workshop. We're going to just hold for a minute while people come in, and then we'll just get started. Thank you. Okay, if you just joined, we're still waiting for people to load in from the lobby, and we'll get started in a minute.
Yeah, I would love to turn it into a PhD at some point.
Okay, let's get started. Thank you all for joining us. This is the Grasslands workshop that we're organizing as part of our outreach to understand how we might update the grassland section in our Natural and Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy. My name is Amanda Hansen. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Climate Change at the California Natural Resources Agency, and I'm joined by my colleague Clessie, who will introduce herself momentarily. Just wanted to start off with a couple of quick logistics. First is please stay muted during the presentation. And second, we are going to be recording this webinar, so it'll be posted on our website if anyone wants to take a look later on. And then lastly, if you want to access closed captioning, go to your meeting controls at the top right of your screen, select More, then select Language and Speech, and then turn on live captions. So please let us know if you have any issues with that. And with that, I will just sort of outline our agenda for the day and let you know kind of our goals for the hour. So we kicked off the update to the California Climate Smart Land Strategy, I think it was last week, where we essentially did a deep dive on how did we approach the strategy in 2022 and how are we going to be approaching the update to this strategy, which was called for in AB 1757, and it's due January 1st, 2025. We also walked the participants through sort of a short summary, a short history of California's nature-based solutions agenda. That webinar is on our website if anyone would like to watch. And the purpose of that was to really kind of go deep on the strategy and ways that we're going to be adjusting it and the process ahead. Clessie, I'm going to hand it off to Clessie momentarily, and she will provide a short presentation that goes into a little bit of a deep dive on the grassland section itself from the 2022 strategy. The goal of this, and really the goal for today, is to sort of refresh everyone's memory of, okay, what do we identify as priority nature-based solutions on grasslands, and then to understand, how might we update those? What are barriers to accelerating those actions? What are potential solutions to those barriers? So Clessie will do a short presentation on that, and then we're going to very quickly essentially turn the floor over to you. And we will be in listening mode to sort of take your feedback and your comments and your suggestions and incorporate those into the draft 2025 strategy. I think with that, I will hand it off to Clessie to get started with the presentation. And yes, I'll find that link.
Thanks, Amanda. My name is Clessie Bennett. I'm a senior environmental scientist at the Natural Resources Agency, and I'm going to share my screen here and walk through a few slides. Are you able to see the slides? Okay,
Looks good.
excellent. Thank you. All right, I'm going to start off with just a very brief outline of our approach to updating the Natural Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy. First and foremost, the heart of the strategy is really these landscape sections that include descriptions of the landscapes themselves, the climate benefits that climate smart land management of these land types can provide, as well as a listing of our priority nature-based climate solutions on each of these landscapes. So we're going to be updating these sections for the strategy, including building in the latest science and refining these solutions based on your input. Second, we're going to be updating the maps that were included in the 2022 strategy, and these are maps on the landscape types. And we'll be integrating the latest land cover data as we update those. Next, we will be taking the next step in our approach to tracking action and measuring outcomes in this sector, which is something that we really took our first step on in the 2022 strategy. Next, we will be adding a new section to this strategy where we will identify barriers to implementing these nature-based solutions and identifying solutions to overcome these barriers. And we're really hoping this is something you all can help us with. And then lastly, we'll be summarizing progress that we've made since the 2022 update, as well as outlining and updating our near-term priorities. All right, a little bit of process information. We kicked off the 2025 strategy update last week with a public kickoff webinar. We are now kicking off our landscape workshops that will run through the end of the month. We'll also be allowing for the opportunity to provide written input. We will also be conducting early tribal consultation and holding some roundtables for tribal governments in the coming months. We plan to release the draft strategy in June of this year, and this will be followed by a public comment period, a tribal consultation period, as well as additional tribal roundtables. And we will release the strategy, as Amanda said, in January of 2025. This is the first of our landscape workshops. We'll be holding the next one tomorrow on forests, and you can find the links for registering for these on our website. All right, so now I'm going to dive into the grasslands section from the 2022 strategy. So grasslands are defined as those lands that are dominated by grasses and have less than 10% shrub or tree canopy cover. These lands cover approximately 9% of the state, and you can see from the map here that they ring the agricultural and cropped lands of the San Joaquin and Sacramento valleys. They are also present in large quantities in the Central Coast and in the Bay Area regions, but are really found in every region throughout the entire state. As far as ownership goes, these lands are dominated by private landowners, making up just over 80% of the ownership of grasslands. So grasslands can provide many climate benefits. Our native perennial grasslands store carbon in their deep root systems and in their soils. Climate smart land management of these lands can also provide a myriad of other benefits, including biodiversity and economic opportunity for rural and agricultural economies. However, these lands have been replaced over time by invasive annual species that are not as resilient to climate change and do not provide the same benefits that our native perennial grasslands do. In the 2022 strategy, we had 5 priority nature-based solutions for the grasslands landscape. First was to increase climate smart and regenerative practices on grasslands, and these included things such as range planting and grazing to meet our ecological goals, including fire resiliency and carbon and water storage. The next solution was about preserving and restoring native grasslands. Third was on protecting grasslands from development and avoiding conversion of these grasslands to more intense land use types. The fourth solution was on applying compost in ecologically appropriate contexts. And E, which really related to 2D, was about increasing on-farm compost production. And this is in an effort to meet the state's waste aversion goals. All right, I also want to tick through our cross-cutting priorities from the 2022 strategy. So these priorities apply to all of the landscape types. So we found when we were developing the 2022 strategy that there were several nature-based solutions that apply to all 8 landscapes. And so we put them together up front in a section on cross-cutting priorities. And we're also hoping to take a look at these in the update and make refinements as are needed. So the first priority here was around prioritizing and practicing equity as we implement these nature-based solutions. Second was to advance multi-benefit and collaborative approaches, working with all landowners. The third one was about empowering Californians. This was about building out a pipeline for California's restoration economy, and also ramping up technical assistance. The next priority was around aligning and leveraging partnerships for increased funding in this space. Next was about the importance of partnering with California Native American tribes as we carry out these nature-based solutions across all of our landscapes. Next, protecting landscapes and focusing on those that deliver multiple benefits, including those that have high carbon storage capacity and are likely to be the most resilient to climate change. Our next priority was about conserving lands that are identified as climate change refugia corridors and helping wildlife and species migrate as range shifts due to climate change. Our next priority is on avoiding conversion and advancing durable protection measures. Our next priority was on combating invasive species. This was identified as an issue across all of the landscapes in California. And lastly, expanding our public and private nursery capacity and seed banks in order to aid in our restoration and reforestation goals that were identified throughout the landscape sections. So next, we're going to transition over into our discussion. So I have a few reminders here. One is to use the raised hand function, and we'll call on you in the order that your hands were raised. You can also put your input in the chat. We'll get to as many of your comments that we can. And as I mentioned at the beginning, there is the opportunity to send in written input. So if there's something you forgot to mention, or if we don't get time to address or hear a comment, you can always email it to us. And just a reminder, this is really our time to hear from you. So we have a couple of questions prepared, and we'd love for you to weigh in on those. So these are our discussion questions today. So we just walked through our 2022 priority nature-based solutions for grasslands. So we're interested in hearing any changes that you'd recommend to these. We also walked through our existing cross-cutting priorities. Similarly, we'd be interested in hearing any changes you'd recommend to those. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to be including a new section in this strategy update on barriers to implementation and overcoming those barriers. So we'd love to hear from you on the barriers you see and have found in implementing these nature-based solutions. We're also interested to know what solutions you think should be employed to overcome these barriers, and in particular, how can we as state government agencies most usefully advance these solutions to overcome barriers. So with that, I am going to put myself on mute and allow for folks to weigh in on any of these questions. All right, the first person I'm seeing is Stuart.
Hi. I think one of the missing pieces is the realization that large swaths of our grasslands are getting fertilized from air pollution with atmospheric nitrogen deposition. And I very rarely see this brought up explicitly. So if you're really concerned about like intense growth of annual grasses, that's one of the drivers. And we've been working with it a lot in Santa Clara County on our serpentine grasslands where the flowers get buried under non-native grasses unless we have an appropriate grazing regime. So I would like to see that explicitly mentioned, and there's a lot of spatial data on the degree to which this nitrogen deposition is taking place. And it's like a background factor that it's really hard to interpret what's happening with our grasslands, especially from a biodiversity viewpoint and productivity, without taking it into account. Thanks.
Thank you, Stuart. I see there's some comments in the chat. Thanks for putting those in. Seeing a few more hands raised. Next is Dina.
Hi. So I had a couple of questions. In the slide there was some text there about protecting native grasslands, and I'm wondering how it's defined in this sense, in this context of what that means. And then I just, from a more of a person that's kind of new to this process, how does having this strategy help with protection of grasslands? How are you wanting people to apply this, and how does this benefit grasslands?
So
Thanks.
I'll just pipe in really quickly to say, first of all, I think it would be very helpful to hear from you on how you think we should define native. So I'm going to turn that question back around and really welcome people's input on this. It's a topic of a lot of discussion. And then to answer your second question, this is the strategy that really outlines California's approach to managing lands for climate benefits. And so it informs our climate policies and investments. Leslie, I can't see who's next. Can you? I see that there's a hand though.
Yes, Adrienne. Thank you.
Let's see. Okay, there we go. Hi, everybody. I want to throw out a novel idea to the group and see what you think about it, because I've been following this a little bit. Of course, for all of us in Sonoma County, we've been battling all of our natural disasters here since 2017. So I really have not keyed into this a lot, just watching it from the sidelines. But there's been some thought on this, and we have the Williamson Act. Many of our grazing lands that are in agriculture are part of that program. we could take the Williamson Act and do an enhanced Williamson Act, where people who just want to sign up like they are now and they get a tax break, that's fine. But if they do more than that, they could be in the enhanced program and earn more sorts of credit. And I was also thinking about, you know, the state lands and managing those. And when I was executive director at a resource conservation district in Siskiyou County, we actually managed grazing leases for the Cowfish and wildlife area. And they were managed specifically for either ducks and geese or sandhill crane habitat and nesting. And that was a really good program. So there's a lot of things out here that I think we could actually utilize and come up with programs that help, especially ag farmers. And I come from a cattle ranch, so know all the challenges of managing the land. And we are the last cattle ranch in our area. Everything around us has been developed. So we're the habitat. We are, yes, the natural area that all of our wildlife and our birds and everything depend on. So anyway, throwing that out, if anybody's interested, you can contact me. I think I actually have some stuff written up. Supervisor Madrone and I had put together something, and we had actually talked to people in Sacramento about that some years back. So I might be able to dig that up. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, I'm seeing Dina.
Hi, thank you. I guess I had, this is pretty high level, which is expected, but I'm wondering about some things like a lot of the grasslands in my region, which is in the East Bay, the San Francisco Bay, we're losing a lot of grassland to brush encroachment. So a lot of coyote brush is encroaching into, especially the coastal influenced grasslands. So I think, you know, for us in my agency, I work for the East Bay Regional Park District. That's kind of a priority area for grasslands because we're losing them so quickly. And I think that that's probably the case for a lot of the grasslands along the coast. So, and then there's a lot of money right now for seed collection and increasing seed supplies in California and for grassland species. And I think we should think a little bit about seed zones, about like, you know, not just pooling all the species together to have like this giant source of seeds. And I don't really think that's what's happening, but I think just to make it explicit that there should be some thought about that would be helpful for this strategy. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Next, we have Stephanie.
Hi there. I'm working right now with the People, Food and Land Foundation, going through climate action plans for cities and counties. And one of the big barriers that we're seeing is that a lot of cities and counties in their general plan and climate action plans really only see compost as a waste diversion strategy. So I wanted to mention that if there's any way to work more closely with CalRecycle or with individual cities and counties to actually incorporate more of this compost application into rangelands that are in the surrounding areas of cities or in unincorporated areas and counties, I think that there would be just generally a much more circular economy when it comes to compost.
Thank you. Next, Carrie.
Yes, thank you. I had just a few thoughts. I appreciated that last comment, and just to build off it, I think helping provide resources as far as like what it actually takes to apply compost to rangelands in an ecologically appropriate way. It is, you know, not best used on all soil types, for example. That really changes the carbon uptake. And then, you know, ensuring that plastic contamination is below like maybe a certain threshold. And basically just get like providing more explicit guidance on like what factors need to be considered for like where it's appropriate to spread compost. So I think there's and same with a lot of strategies, but just being more explicit and like slope data and things like that, that can help take some of the guesswork out for like counties and cities as they're planning to start doing these types of work. And another thing I wanted to say would be really helpful was is a barrier is mapping and data. I think a lot of counties are starting to look at climate smart strategies as part of their carbon sequestration potential, as well as, you know, getting those other co-benefits. And so it would be helpful for the state to either provide like downscaled like land cover mapping at like the county level. And you know, it'd be helpful to like maybe break out like conservation targets or implementation targets for these strategies at a lower level, like more granular than region, just to help provide additional guidance, so counties can start to think about like, you know, their proportion of that overall share of the state goal.
Thank you, Carrie. As you can see, we're both fervently taking notes. Next is Stuart. Stuart, you might be muted if you're speaking.
Sorry. I wanted to reinforce Dina's comment about scrub encroachment as a loss of grasslands, especially these very rich coastal grasslands. And that's just going to require a lot of like upscaling our use of fire and grazing, with some selective, you know, mechanical and chemical control to kind of get things, you know, because it's kind of a one-way street. It's like once it turns into coastal scrub or chaparral, it's really hard to take it back to grassland. So related to that is like the indigenous uses of fire. You know, we really need to figure out how to get more fire on the landscape in grasslands, which technically is the most straightforward. I wouldn't say it's easy, but you know, for prescribed fire, grasslands are probably the best place to start. And then lastly, the mapping issue, because the native biodiversity pockets we find in our annual grasslands are, you know, very fine scale. And we just need a lot more kind of boots on the ground and surveys and maybe some innovations to find those places. Like one really good indicator of a native grassland is basically the wildflower display. So, you know, and that's something that really appeals to a lot of people. That's like biodiversity in your face. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thanks, Stuart. Next we have Pelayo.
Yes, thank you. Pelayo Alvarez with Audubon's Conservation Ranching Program. Barriers to implementation include insufficient financial assistance and technical assistance for private landowners to implement nature-based solutions. And I was wondering if there are any specific strategies or mechanisms that you're thinking about to improve or increase that both technical and financial assistance to landowners.
I think we would want to know ideas that you have on what we should do regarding increasing TA and funding. So if you have more specifics of ways that we could do this, I know we'd love to hear that.
So there are a few programs. So there mostly the funding comes from federal programs. So when I say NRCS, probably the EQUIP program, CSP, and some of the state programs do that. But I'd like to see a specific program targeting rangelands, not only grasslands. For that, it would be great to have a state program just for practices that would be implemented on rangelands and maybe even just planning as well. So it would be great to have kind of similar to so the state equivalent of the NRCS Environmental Quality Incentives Program would be excellent, and leverage that federal funding with some state funding.
Can you just say the name of the program again that you would want it to be?
It's EQUIP, EQIP, Environmental Quality Incentives Program. There's also CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program.
And don't they have a grassland specific program?
They do fund practices on grasslands and rangelands. But again, I'd like to see some from the state, a state program just devoted to rangelands. That would be great.
Thank you. Next we have Dina.
Okay, so just to add to what Stu was saying, so defining what a native grassland is, I mean, right now, the way I know about defining that is using a standard vegetation classification framework. So Manual of California Vegetation is pretty specific, and you can't at this point find these kinds of grasslands that would fall out as highly native. I would call it highly native grasslands rather than a native grassland, but you have to do that on the ground, like Stu was saying, like boots on the ground. So it is quite expensive to be able to do something like that. So if you want to protect them, you really need to figure out where they're at. And I know, CDFW, for instance, we were able to get a grant through Veg Camp to be able to do that on a certain number of acres on the lands that I'm helping to steward. But, I don't know anybody else has gotten that funding, and it would be really great if there was more funding to be able to do that. So if you don't know where they're at, then you can't protect them. So that would be one thing, is funding for mapping specifically. And then the other thing, if I can remember what I was going to say about coastal scrub invasion, I think I might have forgotten my thought on that, but I did have something. But oh yes, regulatory hurdles. So removal of scrub, in particular coyote brush, from grasslands, at least in my region, is very much limited by regulations due to a certain species that is known for this scrub. Anyway, so there are ways that people are working with some of the regulatory agencies and with cutting the green tape, but it's still pretty hard to be able to really try to save our grasslands from this kind of scrub encroachment. So I think helping people understand what the options are, and maybe working on releasing and helping people understand the value of grasslands and how we're losing them and how it is a priority, and we really do need to let up some of those regulatory hurdles. I mean, there's plenty of BMPs you can use to avoid impacts to the species that they're concerned about, that we're all concerned about. So I think that's a big one. It's a very intimidating for people to even want to touch it, to remove scrub from grasslands. So thanks.
Thank you. Stuart, I don't know if you have your hand up from before, or if you have another comment.
Sorry, I didn't take my hand down.
Oh, that's okay. Brian.
Yeah, hi there. Oh, there we go. Hi there, Amanda and Klesi. This is Brian Shobe. I'm the policy director with the California Climate and Agriculture Network, or CalCAN. And first, just want to say I appreciate everyone else's comments so far. So in response to your first question there, I would echo Dina's point about adding prevention of brush encroachment to the list of priorities, and also would echo Stuart's point about adding prescribed fire, which is a tool we're hearing increasing interest in from ranchers we work with. In terms of barriers and solutions, I have 3 that I want to walk through. So the first, which Plio and others have talked about, is a lack of funding for prescribed grazing infrastructure. And I just want to note here that there were some researchers at UC Berkeley that completed a survey of both public and private grassland managers last year and found that lack of funding for prescribed grazing infrastructure was the top barrier to restoring grazing to areas where it had been removed, or better managing grazing where it already exists. So the solution to that is to make that infrastructure eligible in existing state grant programs or new grant programs like Pelayo described. The second barrier is that we're hearing the most about is around environmental permitting costs and delays to state-funded vegetation management projects. So RCDs and fire safe councils we work with who are trying to scale up prescribed grazing as a fire risk reduction strategy or invasive vegetation management strategy are finding that the CEQA process costs a minimum of $80,000 and a minimum of 6 to 12 months to get through that process. So the solution there is to get some help from agencies in cutting that green tape and streamlining the regulatory process and requirements for both prescribed fire and prescribed grazing. And then to that point, the third barrier is limited technical capacity and expertise in grazing and grassland ecology in certain state agencies and programs that manage or regulate grasslands. And the solution there is to increase the staff capacity, or the one I would recommend is to increase the staff capacity at the Range Management Advisory Committee, also known as RMAC, which is authorized in statute to advise multiple agencies on the science and the science and practice of rangeland management. But that committee only has one part-time staff person, and so they're really limited in how much they can engage in that kind of strategic planning and advice to other agencies. So lastly, I just want to note that on the legislative side, SB 675 by Limon addresses a number of these points and has received unanimous bipartisan support in the legislature, and we are expecting that bill to pass off the floor in the coming months, and then we will need the governor to sign it. So any help the administration can provide in that would be appreciated. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian.
And I'll put this all in a comment letter too. I know that was a lot.
We got it, but that was great. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Amanda.
All right, next is Eric.
Thank you. And I'm a grad student right now at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey. And we're writing our thesis about implementing regenerative grazing, namely adaptive multi-paddock grazing on DoD land. And I felt like all of our struggles, Brian has just like went through the list of the exact same things. We call it red tape, green tape. That's a great new term that I'll be using because I mean, the list of requirements we have to provide to do something that studies recommend, that studies show are environmentally beneficial, has been frustrating to say the least. But yeah, I just really appreciate what Brian outlined there for us. And if you could add that would be really helpful, either to the chat or to send out somehow. That'll be an arrow in my quiver, so to speak. So thank you so much. But as far as another barrier that we've found is just land access for folks who want to do something like this, which is why we're using DoD installations, because there's a lot of land that is managed by typically one or two tools, whether that's fire, but grazing is not something typically used. So we like fire as a tool, but we also think grazing management is an outstanding tool as well. So yeah, I appreciate everybody's comments so far. This has been very informative.
Thank you. Next is Pelayo.
Yeah, this is, well, it could be a barrier. It would be great if the state-owned lands, if we could conduct an inventory of the state-owned lands, the status of the grasslands, the tools available for their management, and where are places where this nature-based climate solutions could be start being implemented on state-owned land directly or through leases with other, like grazing leases would be fantastic, but it'd be great to have that that inventory of where could the grasslands be better managed, and what kind of partnerships can we put together to do that.
Great. Eric, I see your hand is still up. Do you have another comment?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. Just when Pelayo said that about the land access, something we've been really mulling over is additionally, initially we thought these need to be leases for all this state loan. This is California Military Department land. But what we're trying to shift is this is a services in kind. So you are doing fuel load management, invasive species control, biodiversity restoration, name it, whatever your common ground or goals you come up with. But you're providing a service, therefore there's no lease fee. So I know that's tough for some people to get over, but as far as state-owned land, I think that's an opportunity for folks who maybe see overhead, that this is kind of a way to get around that for climate goals.
Great, thank you. I do want to note there's been a lot of great activity in the chat, and we are making sure to capture the conversation there. And if anyone who wants to make a comment, or expand on something that they mentioned in the chat, can always come off mute and do so. Just muted myself. I'm seeing Kathleen next.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for hosting this workshop. It's been really, really interesting. I'm Kathleen Ave. I work in the strategy organization at SMUD, the Sacramento Municipal Utility District. And SMUD is a member of EPRI's Power and Pollinators Initiative, which organized a bunch of utilities across the country, actually internationally, to leverage their land assets to support pollinator habitat, which intersects pretty tightly with grasslands in many cases, other land cover types as well. But that's a big opportunity, I think, for the state and the utilities here. I actually searched through the prior strategy document, and utilities were only mentioned once in the context of wildfire, risk reduction. And I think that's a missed opportunity. And I am trying, again, Pelayo will remember that we tried together with some others to move a project forward that I'll say management wasn't quite ready for, because it's not in the wheelhouse of utilities to do nature-based solutions. And that's a big gap, I think, and an opportunity for the state to undertake. So there's the Monarch CCAA, Candidate Conservation Agreement with Assurances. It's a big opportunity for utilities and transportation agencies as well. So that's something to potentially focus on. And I also wanted to mention, I saw the comments about compost. We've been approached by some consultants who were wondering if they could take some compost from local governments onto our transmission corridors. And we are actually experimenting now with using the tree trimmings from our vegetation management in a nice kind of closed loop system, applying them in a very thick layer and planting native plants with the hope that they won't require as much supplemental irrigation, if any, down the road. So mulch isn't mentioned. Compost is specifically mentioned in a couple of places, and I just wondered about that and think maybe there is an opportunity for an expansion of that. If it came along with, I'm anticipating a subsequent question, but with the guidance that one of the previous commenters mentioned on where are the appropriate places to apply it, under what conditions, excuse me, and with adequate screening, to ensure that there's no additional pollution. Anyway, just some ideas along those lines. And also just one quick one, the regional sections in the prior strategy, I think, are fabulous. I think there could also be some collaboration concepts developed, because a lot of entities do manage land that cuts across multiple land cover types. And maybe there are ways to kind of clarify the path to collaboration across those, or across different types of institutions, that would kind of make it clearer how that work can contribute to reducing carbon emissions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Dina.
Kathleen actually addressed exactly what I was going to mention, is working across boundary to do grassland conservation work is key. I also think, typically to work cross boundary, there's a lot of capacity issues amongst organizations. So I think anything that we can point to capacity building opportunities, or just to build that into things, like, if there's a grant, that having capacity building in it is going to be really important for any cross-boundary collaboration. So I'm not quite sure how you'd word that in here, but it is something that I know we bump up against a lot, and I know others do too. Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other hands. Oh, there we go. Courtney.
Hi, thank you. Courtney Brown from the California Alliance for Community Composting. It's not really a suggestion, more just a comment that we do support your existing priority on compost application, with an emphasis on where it is ecologically appropriate, given the expertise that have been weighed in by a few other folks commenting today and on your February 1st kickoff meeting. And we believe that's because it's got those cross-cutting co-benefits in carbon sequestration, helping with drought tolerance. And as we know, healthier soils happen because of the compost application on them. So to keep those grasslands able to provide their ecosystem services, we do think compost application should stay as an existing priority. And then the second one about the on-farm compost application. I do believe this could possibly be a solution to some of the concerns that have been brought up by other folks on this call, which are, the quality of the compost that is being applied to grasslands at large, being maybe riddled with this microplastics problem or this glass problem. But with the on-farm compost production, you really do have an opportunity to take that crop yield that is not meant for market, and also to pull that in with the clearing of defensible space and the use of the other woody biomass that might be coming from the surrounding areas, and produce a compost that is appropriate for the application to these virgin untouched grasslands. So I just wanted to say there's a lot of opportunity here to build out not only the safe production of compost for an ecologically appropriate application of that compost, but that these grasslands and their ecosystem service could really serve a large benefit for the carbon sequestration and carbon drawdown. And I don't want it to be overlooked in any future iterations or drafts of this strategy. So I appreciate all the work and the research that you and others are putting into this. I think is quite commendable. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else want to weigh in with a comment? Again, just a thank you for everyone's conversation in the chat, and that we will be capturing that as well.
Well, I'll just take the lull in the conversation to say something that I meant to say at the top of the call, which is that when we produced the draft 2022 strategy, we got, first of all, we had tremendous public input into the development of the draft, but then we also had tremendous public comment on the draft that was released. And, you know, these sections, these priority nature-based solutions, were just so significantly informed and improved by the sort of experience and expertise of people like you. So I just wanted to say thank you for bringing that to this update, because we're really excited about it. So I'm sorry I didn't say that at the top. And I think Klessie and I will, given that we have 8 minutes, we'll just hang out on the line till the end of the hour. And if people join late and want to pipe in, they can. If you've said everything you have to say, no harm, no foul for hopping off. But we'll be hanging out and just happy to listen to whatever comes to your minds.
I also just wanted to update the slide. So again, you can see what we've got coming up over the next few weeks. And as I mentioned, if you want to provide written input, if you have colleagues who weren't able to make it today, who want to weigh in, please email us naturebasedsolutions@resources.ca.gov. You know, we'll be taking comments through the rest of the month.
Amanda and Klessie, I'm curious, has there been discussion within your agency about the Monarch CCAA? Are you working actively on it at all?
It's very possible. Our Deputy Secretary for Biodiversity and Habitat, that position has been unfilled for the last few months, but it is getting filled in coming days. And so we're really excited to have Megan Hurdle join our team. So it's possible that this would have risen up to our attention, but just didn't, because we don't have our like key partner on sort of biodiversity things right in our ear. But that's I mean, I really appreciated you flagging that, because you know, it's an existing program. People just need to, it's great.
And it was many years in the making, like that, a lot of work went into that, the development of it. So it really would be great if more utilities, including the big ones in California, would hop on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, thanks for the webinar. This is great.
Thank you.
I did just have one sort of, I mean, idea. I don't know how useful it'll be, but the Bay Area Greenbelt Alliance put out a report that analyzed agricultural lands and wildlands that were at risk of development. And it was like short-term risk of development, and then like 5 years, and then like 10 years. And they have a whole I'll just put a link, but you can get the report, and then there's really interesting methodology for how they calculate that. But that, I think, is maybe a useful way if there was a broader analysis that highlighted where agricultural and native wildlands were at risk of development for places that could be targeted for conservation measures. Anyway, I just thought I would share that. I don't know how feasible that is at a large scale, but.
Well, it sounds, I mean, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but it sounds a little bit like the Sustainable Ag Lands Conservation Program, where there's very clear focus on what it sounds like the similar agricultural lands that are at high risk for conversion. Not my area of expertise deeply, so forgive me, but I'm glad you put something into the chat. We'll check it out.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's helpful.
I think I'll fill the lull here. And just as a big general initiative, I mean, we need to really get a many-fold increase in general stewardship resources in every ecosystem. I say many-fold, I mean many-fold, because we are so far behind the curve, and the demand is just so far exceeds our capacity. So, but getting those long-term stewardship funds, not a 3-year grant, not a 5-year grant, but like in perpetuity, because that's what it takes, finding avenues for providing that. I'm working under some habitat conservation plans and natural community conservation plans. And that's where I see the most existing, like, in perpetuity management and stewardship money. So kind of building off of those, there's some examples out there, but we're not going to be doing this with short-term grants. It just doesn't work that way.
I have a question back to you, Stuart. Do you have a mechanism in mind that you think would be able to fund such stewardship into perpetuity?
Well, what happens now with mitigation lands often is, actually always, there's a management endowment that's set aside. So they do what's called a property analysis report, a PAR, that says, okay, here's your stewardship needs. Here's how much money it will take to endow that annual stream. And unfortunately, usually the stewardship needs are way underestimated. That you do bit off a lot there, but it's a good start. Just having a little bit of money each year is a lot better than getting one big chunk at once when you're trying to take care, because especially grasslands, there's such a moving target with a wet year, a dry year. The rancher had to thin his herd, then you get a high productivity year, there's not enough cows to munch down the grass, etc. Just all these on the ground things. So And then also, I would say money invested in conservation easements, like via the California Rangeland Trust, is that they come with stewardship by the ranchers. The appreciation of what the ranchers are doing in terms of weed control, keeping the annual grass down, making good wildflower displays, et cetera, is vastly underappreciated outside of a pretty narrow community. So, groups like the Rangeland Trust, the California Rangeland Conservation Coalition, I think there's a lot of opportunity there to just really kind of step up the stewardship discussion and think about, how do you get consistent long-term management of lands?
Well, I want to follow up with a question, but we are now a minute over. So we'll have to follow up another time. I'll just leave you all with it, which is, what are sort of the key pillars of building out that stewardship pipeline? It's something that I think about, and I'd love people's thoughts on, because it's not just one thing. I think that's, Stuart, exactly what you were saying. So anyway, this was a really great discussion, as expected. But thank you all so much for the thoughtful contributions and reflections. This is just great. As Plessy said, we've been taking copious notes. It's obviously recorded. So we've got your input, and we're happy to welcome more through written comments to our Nature-Based Solutions email address. And I think with that, Plessy, do we need to say anything before we say farewell?
Nope.
Amanda, I have one more thing I'd like to tell you, be of interest, which is we're starting up the Bay Area Conservation Lands Network 3.0 analysis, just looking at the 10 counties around San Francisco Bay. And we're really going to try and take a look at the stewardship landscape across a lot of different agencies and use that as a springboard to kind of address that question of how do we raise the capacity, both the people and the funding that we need to get this done. So so I'm going to be writing you an email with some links and stuff. Give you the nitrogen papers, et cetera, et cetera. So
wonderful.
So look for some input.
Thank you. We will definitely keep our eyes out. That's much appreciated. Okay.
Well, thanks.
Well, thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day and week, and maybe we'll see you at another landscape webinar. Until then, bye everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.